Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Alexander Khalil to this conference. We have been friends for a while, and he has a unique set of skills, I think I can say, which have been revelatory to many of us. I'll just give you a quick resume of his work. He's an ethnomusicologist and cognitive scientist, specializing in music learning and transmission, musicality and human interaction, and the perception of time. Informed by his long experience as a chanter in the Greek Orthodox tradition, his ethnographic work investigates timing and temporality amongst chanters, both at ancient centers of the tradition, such as Constantinople, and in the diaspora. His work in cognitive science connects the ability to synchronize or co-process time rhythmically with other cognitive skills, such as attention behavior and the practice of music to broader areas of cognition. He received his doctorate in music at the University of California, San Diego in 2009. Excuse me, and then was a postdoctoral scholar at the Department of Cognitive Science at UCSD, and a fellow at the Temporal Dynamics of Learning Center, which is a National Science Foundation Science of Learning Center. Then in 2014, he joined the Institute for Neural Computation, and he's currently a lecturer at the School of Film, Music and Theatre, University College Cork, Ireland. I tried actually to discover how to pronounce the Gaelic, for that I didn't manage, so I'm just going to leave it in English translation. But please welcome Dr. Alexander Khalil. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Father Ivan. Let me just make sure that the screen sharing is now working. Hopefully you are now seeing my test slide. And if you are, then yes, I can begin.
Yep, we are, yes.
Great. So I would like to begin by thanking you and the ISOCM board for inviting me to speak today. I'm very humbled, honored, and happy to be with you here and to share a story that I'm pretty excited about. I would also like to thank Father Sakkab's family, particularly his daughter Dahlia, for providing some amazing photographs and recordings as I prepared for this presentation. Even in the expansive time frame allotted a keynote presentation, I feel that we will still be doing something akin to viewing a landscape through a keyhole. So please forgive me for all of the important and interesting information that I managed to leave out of this talk. I will also note that during the beginning of this talk, as you can see here, you will see not much more than a dark blue screen. That's intentional. Hopefully nothing wrong is happening, okay? So now that I've managed your expectations, let's begin. We naturally conceptualize voice and place as two discrete, easily discernible phenomena. I will begin by pointing out, however, that it is impossible to experience voice independently of place, both in terms of acoustics and of culture. Voices resound in space, and with each reverberation, each voice is gradually transformed by the shape in which it resounds. Singers naturally attune and tune themselves to this phenomenon, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. These self-reinforcing cycles may happen over milliseconds, as in the case of acoustic space, in which, for example, resonant frequencies and reflective surfaces rapidly assert their presence, becoming part of a singer's proprioception, changing not only the way they sound, but their experience of singing and their experience of their own voice. These self-reinforcing cycles may also take months, years, or decades, as a singer attunes themselves to resonances that move through a community, be it a monastery, a village, or a city. The reality of our experience, then, is that what we call voice is always a combination of intrinsic qualities and extrinsic context. Our voices, then, in production and in perception, are not entirely our own, but are entangled with our surroundings and thus with each other. This is as unsurprising as it is profound. We know that singers from different places have different sounds and different styles. In the received tradition of Byzantine chant, that is, as it's practiced today, one can often recognize a chanter's background after hearing only a couple of notes. And as some of you may know, much of my previous work is focused on this dynamic. However, focusing solely on this entanglement in situ, that is, exploring sound associated with a single place over time, can obscure the fact of dynamic and ongoing processes. Consider that people move. Communities, all communities, even monastic ones, are in a state of dispersal, or in a constant state of dispersal and realignment. This may be seen on the largest scale with the ebb and flow of generations who bring with them their own tastes and proclivities, but also in smaller timescales as people move about for various reasons. Voice and topography clearly are deeply entangled. This entanglement, however, is not directly mapped onto one or another place, but constitutes its own topography, what I am calling a musical topography in time. I would note that this is a work in progress. I'm still refining and developing this theoretical frame. And today, I more urgently would like to talk about one such topography, that of a truly extraordinary Palestinian priest from Jerusalem, and to whom the present talk is dedicated, Father Hanna Sakkab of blessed memory, who passed away on November 8th, 2020, after an extraordinary life of 94 years, 66 of which were spent in the priesthood, and all of those were spent in diaspora. I will follow his life story as pertains to his chanting and these issues of of topography in a mostly chronological order, slowly revealing this topography in time. Before we go any further, just so that your potentially first time hearing of Father Sakkab isn't influenced by my words, I'd like to begin by playing a brief example of his chanting. I recorded this in 2007 when he was 82 years old. It is him chanting, "Shine, Shine, O New Jerusalem."
Staniri istaniri ya urashalimu لأن مجد الرب قد أشرق عليك from حيل آن وتهللي يا صهيون وأنت يا نقية يا والدة،
Like a hill or a rock upon which a city may be built, Father Sakkab's unique talents existed somehow outside the linear chronology I will relate. Father Sakkab was talented not only in music, having a strong and melodious voice, as you've just heard, but also with words. During his life, he wrote 3 volumes of poetry in classical Arabic, featuring poems for special occasions and for certain people. He was self-trained in this art well until the age of 90, when he completed an MA in Arabic poetry. Many of his poems were, as he described it, received fully composed in dreams. And as you will see, mysterious reception and transmission of text will become a theme here. Liturgically, his skill with words was often put towards another, often manifest in a different way. I've often looked over his shoulder many times in awe as he picked up a Minyan in Arabic and chanted prosomia in English directly from it, translating as he went, fitting the melody to the prosomion also in real time, while managing somehow cogent, poetic, and theologically accurate text. He didn't view this as anything extraordinary, but simply as a necessity, since there were occasions, especially before all of the online resources came online, for which we simply didn't have a text in English. Now let's begin our chronology. Father Sakkab was born in the ancient Christian quarter of Jerusalem in 1927 to Saman Yusuf Sakkab and Latifa Theodore Sakkab. Full disclosure, my father was born in the same year in Bethlehem, just down the road, and he and Father Sakkab were friends for more than 75 years. That's how I came to know him, and later to serve as his chanter in his church. So Father Sakkab's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all priests, all serving in Jerusalem. When little Hanna was 4 years old, his father moved the family and built a house in a newer suburb of Jerusalem called Katamon. Literally, in Greek, it just means below the monastery. What monastery? St. Simon Monastery in Jerusalem. It was populated, a relatively affluent suburb populated by Greek and Arab Christians. Before Father Sakkab became a priest, people in his community assumed he would take up the priesthood. In fact, his mother made the prediction when he was only 6 months old, and he was nicknamed Abuna, or father. This was because the strength and clarity of his chanting marked him out to be a priest. The influence of both his parents forms the deepest layers of the topography of his chanting. Father Sakkab described the influence of his mother thus, and I quote, "Long before I became a priest, people already began calling me Abuna, as they were certain I would one day become one. One day my mother said to me, 'Some priests pray, but the people don't understand. They only swallow some of the letters, but do not understand. Please, when you become a priest, make people hear so that they may swallow every letter and understand.' I took this to heart and practiced making every word clear. Now, even when I chant in English or other languages, people can hear clearly every letter. This is not simply a matter of aesthetics. This plays a great role in the life of a priest. Either he will be loved and people will be anxious to hear from him, or they won't love him or care to hear what he says. This has not only served me in Arabic, even American congregations say that they understand me better than priests who speak only English. This gift from my mother has made me a successful priest for all this time." Let's briefly consider the phrase his mother used, swallow the words. This is easy to let slip by, as at first glance one might think that his mother was simply using a colorful way of exhorting him to be intelligible, since after all, particularly from our present day and Western cultural perspective, understanding of text is of paramount importance. But I would also point out that this is a family, generations of priesthood, steeped in tradition and in scripture, that would be no stranger to the many scriptural references from Ezekiel to Revelations and the many stories, such as that of Saint Romanos, pictured here, in which the swallowing of a text or a scroll carries much more significance than the present-day connotation of just hearing and understanding. Ingesting a text, scroll, letters, and all represents receiving something divine and then of embodying it. And what I mean by that is by experiencing it in an embodied way, by internalizing it. Consider that in the ancient world, and even in medieval times, texts were not considered quite as externalized as we view them today. The image Father Sakkab's mother paints, then, is that through successful or properly performed chanting, a priest may fully transmit something divine. His embodiment or internalized text makes it available for a congregation to also internalize and experience in an embodied way. His mother's admonition was manifest in his chanting as very clear and almost forceful elocution. 74 years later, when I asked Father Deacon Maxime Najim, who served at St. George Church in San Diego along with Father Sakkab for several years, about his chanting, he responded that his pronunciation of words is very clear. This resonates with his style of communicating theology. In the church, there's no room for any kind of mistake that would lead people in the wrong way. His desire for correct pronunciation of words is related to his pastoral style and of not beating around the bush. His chanting speaks the mind of the church. And just to quickly give you a taste, while I know that most of you cannot speak Arabic, I think his enunciation is so clear that I suspect you'd be able to transcribe this into your own alphabetic systems. This is a psalm verse from Within the Possible Praises. As smoke vanishes, so let them vanish, as wax melts at the presence of fire.
ما يباد الدخان يبادون وكما يذوب الشمع من أمام وجه النار.
Hopefully you can see what I mean there. Father Sakkab's father's influence on his chanting was much more direct. He simply taught him how to chant. From his early childhood, Father Sakkab Sr. would not only teach his son through apprenticeship in church by having him chant with him on a daily basis, but would also teach his son daily lessons in which he would hold his son's hand, palm up, and with his other hand tap the rhythms of chant on his wrist. Father Sakkab Jr. related to me that since this is one of the few places where the body's internal rhythms rise near the surface of the skin, that during these times he felt that his father was tapping the rhythms of chant into his heart, synchronizing his pulse to them. And that since then he experienced chant as coursing through his veins. While one might imagine from this that Father Sakkab Sr.'s contribution or focus was rhythm, it was really much more than that. And again, it's about internalization of text and hymns. From his father, Father Sakkab Jr. learned a vast number of hymns without the use of notation or text of any kind. Again, we see emphasized the importance of internalizing scripture or hymnography. He did not simply learn the process by which one might interpret written neumes on the page, as we'll see this came later, nor did he merely learn the process by which one might declaim a written text musically, based on modal systems, theses, etc. Instead, what he learned from his father was something that was deeply part of the aesthetic and ethos, with a TH, of contemporaneous Jerusalemite and Constantinopolitan traditions. He memorized full hymns, text, melody, and their interpretive possibilities. I'll mention as a testament to this, I once made a studio recording of him singing hymns of Pascha in Arabic and Greek, and during the 4 or 5 hours that it took, never did he refer to any text of any kind. Oops, there we go. Father Sakkab graduated from Anachta College in Jerusalem in 1947, having taken preparatory classes in theology. He had a scholarship to attend St. Vladimir's Seminary in Paris and planned upon completing those studies to return to Jerusalem and enter the priesthood. Unfortunately, these plans were abruptly shattered in 1948 when war broke out. The organization that was to fund his studies collapsed and prevented him from attending seminary. Fortunately for him, and practically out of the blue, a widow of a graduate of the local theological school in Jerusalem, which had then been closed, presented him with a text of theological books that were used at the school. He studied these intently, and they became the basis or center of much of his work as a priest. With the war raging, his entire family and practically everyone who lived in the Katamon quarter fled the country. And I would note that this community actually ceased to exist at this time. Then Reader Sakkab first went to Jordan, where he formed the choir for the Church of the Redeemer in Amman. He also co-established there the Society for Orthodox Sunday Schools, which still exists today as the Orthodox Education and Teaching Society in Amman. He was married to Mary Bandak in 1952 and moved to Beirut in 1954, when he was ordained as a priest on the 15th of August. He served at the Church of Dormition in Ras Beirut until 1975. Serving with him as chanter and choir director was Elias Almor, son of Lebanon's most famous chanter, Mitri Almor, who lived from 1880 to 1969. Briefly, Mitri Almor was a larger-than-life figure. He's celebrated throughout the Orthodox world for his voice. For example, Nicholas II awarded Almor the Medal of St. Anna, in 1913 for his singing. Most notable, however, was Mitri Almor's extensive campaign to reinvigorate and specifically to codify Byzantine chant in Arabic. Although Arabic-speaking Orthodox, as we've heard earlier today, known throughout the Middle East as Rum, both in Arabic and Turkish, this means Romans, had chanted liturgies, at least partially in the Arabic language, from the mid-9th century. Greek was still the standard liturgical language. Along with a renewed sense of nationalism as Lebanon approached statehood and sought to be defined by its Christianity, came a strong interest in a fully Arabicized liturgy. Almor was the first to borrow Greek neumes and notate Arabic musical texts in a highly systematic way. And again, this had been done or attempted many times, but he had a very clear system for it. And as a side note, his son Elias has compiled this work. Much of it is right there behind me. By far, his most common strategy was to retranslate texts in such a way that they could fit existing and well-known Greek chant melodies. In spite of his best efforts, though, the Arabic language has a strong tendency of having more syllables per phrase than Greek. This meant that in order to leave the Greek melodic lines unaltered, he would need to fit the extra syllables into the line. Hello? What's wrong? Okay.
Nothing.
I don't know what that was. I will continue. Sorry. This rhythmic feature is peculiar to Almor's lineage of students. This became part of the topography of his time spent in Lebanon and collaboration with Elias Almor during his first steps into diaspora. More important, actually I would say much more important than noting this rhythmic peculiarity that you can hear in his chanting, was the fact that Father Sakkab was immersed for 20 years in one of the centers of Arabic chanting, with one of its key proponents chanting liturgies on a daily basis. This gave him an extraordinary level of technical skill, as the two enjoyed, for example, chanting all the liturgica in the mode of the week, or of exploring lesser-known corners of the modal system, along with their potential interpretive possibilities. Given his extraordinary ability at language, he also found himself serving the large Russian community in Beirut, celebrating separate all-Russian liturgies, in which he also learned to adapt some of his chanting to suit Russian. Outside of the issue of Greek versus Arabic, which all Arab chanters must negotiate, this was his first experience chanting in a very different language, and as he put it, helped prepare him for his work in America. I wish I had a recording of his Russian liturgies. I will say that I've heard him chant in Arabic, Greek, English, Russian, Spanish, and even on one occasion, Japanese. Okay, so in 1976, Father Sakkab emigrated to the US and became a priest at St. Elias Church in Syracuse, New York, where he served for 22 years. Having already lived outside of his home country for more than 20 years, he did not find this transition to be as large a change as one might expect. His arrival in the US marked further developments and added new layers to his chanting. The first issue, and I'd say particularly in America, I must mention that I haven't seen it as strong or striking in other Anglophone areas, was language. Here is how he put it. In the States, I found that there are Arabic communities that wish to have services in Arabic and English at the same time. So I had to make some translations according to the music that I am accustomed to chant. I made many translations, and when I chanted in English, I applied properly the Byzantine tunes according to the English language. I had to make some changes, a few little changes to adjust the words to the music. For example, I might add a filler word like verily when I have a phrase that does not have enough words. So let's take a moment to listen to this at the risk of going slightly over in my time. Here he is in Syracuse, New York in 1984 on Holy Friday, leading a procession while chanting the hymn known in the Antiochian church, as Give Me This Stranger in English, but many of you may know it better as Don Ilion Kripsanda. The whole recording is about 10 minutes long, so I'll just play for you the opening phrase in Arabic and then in English. He chanted both back to back as he completed this procession. There we go. In 1998, Father Sakkab moved from Syracuse and was reassigned to St. George Antiochian Church in San Diego, California, where he spent the remaining 22 years of his life. So for this chronological segment, this last one, I thought I would convey aspects of the significance of his chanting in his ministry by relating briefly the story of one of his parishioners, Michael Bertram, who converted about 16 years ago. Disillusioned with his local gospel church, Michael began searching for a form of Christianity that was, as he felt, more true to that of the church fathers. He became interested in Orthodoxy, having learned about it in online Christian forums. Eventually, he discovered that St. George's Church was right nearby his home, and he decided to attend a liturgy. He was a bit unsure of whether he should prepare in some way or what he should expect. So he contacted one of the other clergy of the church, who replied, suggesting that as a potential catechumen, he should actually visit a different Orthodox church in the area, specifically because he thought that he would find the music at St. George, quote unquote, too ethnic. Nonetheless, Michael attended his first Orthodox liturgy at St. George Church and found himself quite overwhelmed by Father Sakkab's chanting. To quote him, "When Father Sakkab chanted, the room shrank. It was as if the power of his voice made everything smaller, but at the same time, it wasn't overbearing or foreign sounding, but personable." Michael stayed in the church, was baptized, and went on to study chant and actually to become a chanter himself. He currently serves as assistant chanter at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in San Diego. After chanting for several years with Father Sakkab, Michael described singing with him thus: "Most of the singing he does in order to support us. He knows that we, that is the congregation and other singers, he knows that we are trying to sing, and he nudges us forward through the melody and waits for us when we are lost. He rarely sings by himself, but when he does, it is very different. He takes us somewhere else." This brief statement in many ways encapsulates the role of chanting in Father Sakkab's ministry and also highlights my central theme of entanglement between place and voice. Father Sakkab's voice shrank the room, so acting on one's lived experience of place. In the image of being lost, again, Father Sakkab's voice is a guide. And when he chants alone, he takes people to another place. I think my brief examples have so far hopefully given you the sense of how his chanting might transport one somewhere else. And also, you will have noticed, even in his old age, the sheer power of his voice, which could fill a room and make it smaller. I'd like finally to play for you a very brief example, I know we're running out of time, sorry, of Father Sakkab nudging singers along and waiting for them, guiding them as described by Michael. This is him with some other singers and congregation members chanting "For God is with us," or "Oti metimono theos." So here you can hear him chanting. For me, I can just hear him kind of pulling everyone along and guiding them and waiting for them, just as Michael described. Might take a few listenings to really pick up on that, but you can definitely hear that he's chanting in a rather simplified way, light on ornamentation, keeping an easy, simple beat. So you can hear him kind of keeping all of the congregation and the choir under his wing, so to speak. So the voice of a priest holds a unique relationship to the place in which it resounds. I here pause to reiterate that I'm less concerned with physical space and acoustics as with the space of community and resonances that pass between people and through generations. Returning to Father Sakkab's mother's admonition to enunciate clearly so that people may internalize and understand his chanting, we are reminded that a priest's voice resounds through their community. As this happens, it is not shaped so much by the expectations, aesthetics, or historical resonances that move through that community, but by its needs. The sound of his chanting, having been entangled with many places, employed to serve many communities, did not so much carry a series of imprints, but rather comprised its own unique topography. Father Sakkab's chanting was indeed part of the soundscape of the liturgical life of the church as a whole and of his parish. And as with any soundscape, its interpretation and experience relates not only to its inherent sound and context, but also to what parishioners bring to this. Beyond that, however, Father Sakkab played an active role in shaping it and using it as a flexible tool to reach parishioners, guiding them in worship. When Father Sakkab shrank the room, that was him reaching his congregation. In so doing, he was not simply connecting them with himself or with his own understandings of hymnography, liturgics, or the underlying theology, nor did his chanting simply signify or represent some kind of authenticity of practice or of belief. You may recall that in the beginning of this talk, I pointed out that our voices are not simply our own, but always feature entanglement between intrinsic qualities and extrinsic contexts. Father Sakkab's chanting, then, its many features accrued and developed into a rich and varied landscape through his long journey as a priest, connected his congregations to the lived experience of the many contexts that formed it. May his memory be eternal.